Jackie Schomburg-Abstract here. One of the things that I try to do on my channel is remind you that you don't need to have the best supplies in the world or the perfect paintbrush or the perfect whatever to make art. You can find things in your house that will work just fine, especially when we're just playing around. So this week, I'm doing a mixed media experiment using this Pure Leaf iced tea bottle, not the tea itself. Although you could do that, but I'm not doing that. This Pure Leaf tea bottle as my main tool. So the overwhelming majority of what I've done in this video is related to this bottle and the label and the cap and all the parts of the bottle. So I hope you'll come along with me. I did not know anything of what this was going to turn out like when I started, but I thought it was time for an experiment. And for all my people listening in the Southern United States, this works perfectly well with sweet tea also. So don't be put off by what you do or don't have around your house. You have enough of anything to play. I'm starting with this Pure Leaf iced tea bottle. This is not at all a sponsorship from Pure Leaf, although I wouldn't be opposed. I keep these, I make my tea typically in the morning, but if I'm on the run, i.e. taking my kids to camp or something, I will grab these so I can caffeinate on the way. And I thought it would just be a fun experiment. So you can see I mixed up some creamy white and I'm just using it as if it's really clunky palette knife of sorts to spread across this piece of paper. Now, this piece of paper has been painted on a bit. I was testing out my different Celadon colors on here from previous videos, and also I put some green gold on there. So there was already a base layer, which was nice, so I'm not starting from scratch completely. And I'm using the label just to lift some of the paint off. That gives different texture. And, you know, again, it's an experiment. I wasn't sure what it was going to be like. I used some water to spray just to see if I can get some little droplet marks on there. And it had been such a long time since I did my last true experiment that I thought this would be fun to just go for it. And it was a blast. Not knowing what anything's going to turn out like is really, really exciting, at least to me. And I would encourage you, if you want to experiment, to make the stakes super low for yourself. So I had a piece of paper that had some paint on it, but nothing was happening with it. So there was nothing to lose. It always makes things easier. See me looking at the bottle, trying to figure out what to do next. Took the cap off, and I thought I would stamp it a little bit. Mixed up a new Celadon color. If you're interested in the Celadon videos, I can put a link in the description and or in the upper right hand corner. You can check those out, where I show you how to mix a bunch of different Celadon shades with various yellows. And there's already quite a bit of texture happening here, but I'm really loading it up because I know I can cover over whatever I want to as we go. The green that's made in the center of that 12 by 12 inch piece of paper is such like an acid green. It's green gold on top of Celadon. And here I'm picking up some of this darker grayish Celadon-y adjacent color. I'm kind of applying it to the paper using that label. So the opposite of when I was taking paint off of it. this is me trying to figure out if my crayons were Neocolor 1 or 2. I'll put a little bit on my base paper, the butcher paper in the background, lick my finger, and if I can smudge it, that means it's Neocolor 2 and it is watercolor, or is water soluble. And I wanted something that was going to blend in. Here I was trying to take my black Neocolor 2 and draw with it around the edge of the bottle cap, and then add gloss medium to make a very subtle mark with it, and it didn't work at all. So not all experiments are successful. So I decided I would just use black paint instead. And this is a high flow black from Golden. And I'm using the various color shapers and paint bottles just to weigh the paper down. Because I put so much paint on it, as it dries, the edges were curling up. And because I was using the high flow, which is very apt, as you see on my palette, is very apt to run, I didn't want the circles to be full of runny marks. Here I'm adding some green gold to the celadon that I made to see if I liked the color that I made, and I did not. It was too, I don't know, acid's the only color I can think of, or the only word I can think of to describe it. But then I mixed it with black, and I liked that. It was a very dark charcoal. And there wasn't a lot there, so it made spreading it tricky. But in that sense, it still gave it a different look than the other ones. Now on the upper left, I liked how that mark, because that was the thickest of the paint, I like how that just dripped a bit of the gray when I added the water. The other side was very, right, there's a lot going on, a lot of texture, a lot of marks, a lot of everything. And I liked that part less. Again, I always think that more is more because you can always cover it up later. So especially with paint, you know, watercolor, you have to be more careful because you can't just wipe sections out necessarily if you're staying true with just the watercolors. But with acrylic, if you don't like something, you can always paint over it. It's much harder to insert things that look like they're in the background at a later date. So I like to build up the textures a lot right off the bat. The next thing I did that you'll see in a moment is I added something called shading gray. It's a high flow color. It's like it just kind of creates like a shadowiness. It's so subtle. You can barely see that I've even added it here. Oh, there you go. You can see a little bit there. So it just adds a little something. And I turned out I didn't want any more. So I moved on from there, added a little bit of pencil just to give it some differentiation. And because I had so much activity happening, I wanted to calm things down again. So mixing up some cream, and this is just straight black I'm adding in. The paper itself is textured. This is like a mixed media paper from, I think, Strathmore. And it's definitely not super duper smooth. So anything I added this high flow to, it's sunk into all of the different textured marks. And it didn't apply very smoothly, especially with the bottle. With a brush, it would have been much better from a coverage perspective. But again, it just added something different. And I'm using a catalyst wedge after I apply the paint to pull it down farther for that reason. It's always fun to add a bunch of black to something that doesn't have a ton of black on it because it's such a bold choice. It feels very, I don't know if powerful is the right word. Maybe it is powerful. But you definitely feel in control when you're adding black. I added just a touch of quinacridone gold just to warm things up on the edges. And as I'm sitting here, I cannot remember if that even shows through at the end or not. But I wanted just a bit of something warmer. You can see how not, right, this does not spread well across the page. If I had added a ton more paint, it would have, and obviously I had to use a different tool, but the texture this was creating with the white was so cool. Just wasn't sure that I liked it over the black. But in my experiments, I always say, when in doubt, keep going, see what happens. There's no paint on the bottle right now. I'm just pushing into the white that I laid down and carving that into the white paint. So it shows up as if it were colored. And the same thing here with this bottle cap. Wherever the paint was not fully dry yet, I was able to carve in a little bit. Added some shading gray there. Again, I didn't like it. Wiped it off as best I could. And with the catalyst wedge, pulling things down, somewhat more effective. But I realized I just needed to dry it more. Don't underestimate the power of multiple light layers. Building it up, you get to see so much of the background and you really get a lot of control over what shines through and what doesn't if you put a bunch of light layers on. It will eventually completely become opaque if you're using an opaque color. You can also do things like I use a label early on to lift paint off. You can do that with paper. You can do that with a plastic iced tea label. You can do it with paper towels. Once you put the paint down, there's a small window of time where you can lift some of it off. It will create a much thinner layer called a veil. It's a veil if you're using opaque colors, and it's, oh my gosh, what's the word? It's a glaze. Sheesh. It's a glaze if you're using transparent colors. So I added a bit of that real light lime green with my Neocolor 2 crayons, and then I put gloss medium over it to set the color, but also to just pull it down and have it be a little bit less defined and a little more streaky. I pulled out my collage papers and I'm going through them, trying to figure out what colors I want to add. And I really, really, really liked how this warm yellow was working. I never know how to pronounce this color, but it's like diarylide yellow. It's such a bright, vibrant color. And I didn't think I was going to like it with that acid green color, but it turns out I did. It's very much like a citrusy feel. Paper was a bit thicker, so I used more time to put this on. This is probably an 80-pound paper that I was adding, plus the paint on top of it. So when I add something that's on a thicker paper like that, I will spend a bit more time holding it down after I glue it so that the edges don't curl up. And once it becomes a tiny bit tacky, then I can hold it down and push it down for a bit, and then it will stay down. It's a little bit more high maintenance to do that, but it's not that big of a deal. And for me, it's not worth the effort of taking out my gel gloss just for one little scrap of paper. As you can see, it took me a while to figure out exactly where I wanted things and if I wanted things. I thought that I wanted that somewhere, I just couldn't decide where. It's funny because this painting kept going from white to then black to then white to then black, and with many iterations in between. And there are so many layers on here. But once I get to the end, things feel much more settled. And even in like the states where it was very, very uncertain what I wanted to do with it. So here I wasn't really sure if I wanted to add more white and just commit to the white with little bits of black, or add more black in. And decisions like that, the nice thing about them is you can continue flip-flopping back and forth. So there's parts of me that really like this. And I probably would have been happy if I had left it like this and added maybe some black lines, or poked through the white paint to get some black coming in from the behind the scenes. But I didn't leave it like this. I decided to keep going. I really thought that adding some very straight stenciled lines would be a good contrast against all of the very organic, flowy shapes that had been emerging. And I really like the contrast of having those there. Didn't like that those were exactly the same length as that big yellow piece in the middle. Eventually, however, I decided to make some pretty major changes. After I unplug the paint that got stuck in my black squeeze bottle. So back to the bottle. Adding some black marks and using my catalyst wedge to pull them down. And a wipe, just a wet wipe to get some of that off, because I did not love the mark that made. But at a certain point, you just need to wait until it dries and then go over it. I leave these things in for many reasons, but mainly because I want you to see that it's not like I love every decision that I've made. There's many times when I make a mark and I think, oh my goodness, I wish I could do that over. And any artist, I think, who would tell you that every single mark they make is intentional, I think would be lying. But maybe that's just because I make lots of unintentional marks. So who knows? But I just think that so much of the joy of creating is in the exploration. And that's when I make the discoveries that really make me excited. about creating things. I used to do very exact, precise, design-focused paintings where I would, overexpose a photo and then work through choosing, 3 colors to use for the whole painting. And they turned out really cool. I really liked them. But there was less discovery. And once I switched to abstract art, which is, for me, 1,000% discovery, things really got a lot more fun. Because anytime I sit down to make something, I might like it, I might not. When I first started doing these lines with this catalyst wedge, I thought, oh boy, that was not ideal. But instead of stopping, I decided I would keep doing it. Because again, I can always paint over it. And I can wipe some away if I need to. I think that one just came out a little dark and I wanted to lighten it up. But now all of a sudden it feels very like urban or like shipyard or bridge construction. There's something about adding those lines where they're straight because the catalyst edge, the edge of the wedge is straight. And they're also distressed because it's not a perfect stamp of a line. I thought that was really cool. It's a very industrial feel, which I think goes along with how the texture of this piece was turning out, but also adds to it. So it gave me the structure that I was looking for with the stenciled tissue paper lines that I almost added, but instead it kept it much more within the distressed world of this painting. This is the back of Light Bright cards that I tore up, and I keep wanting to use it, and I keep almost finding a place for it, and then I don't use it. So at some point, you guys can start bets on how long it's going to take me to fit one of these into a picture or a collage. Maybe we'll raffle something off for the winner. But I don't know. It didn't work this time. I have not found a space where it doesn't just feel very clunky. So if you take one thing away from this video, I would love it if you took away that you do not need to have all of the supplies that I have or any other person you see working online has. You just need paint or collage paper or magazine pages or anything you have around the house aside from paint, which you will need. You can mark, make, and apply paint with just about anything, because the secret sauce in making your artwork is not your brushes. It's just not. The secret sauce for your artwork is you. And no matter which tools you select to make your artwork, your work and the you-ness of your work, the uniqueness of your work that only you can make, will shine through. So in conclusion, keep showing up, grab whatever tools you have available, and keep painting. So tell me in the comments, what is the most random tool you've used to create art with? I would love to know.